Call of War World War II is a free online strategy game that gathers millions of players worldwide. You fight up to 100 other players in real time in games that can take weeks to complete. The games feature World War II historically accurate maps and units that allows you to create your own path and rewrite history. Call of War World War II is fully cross-platformed. Your objective is to take over the world. Define your own strategy, build powerful armies by combining dozens of different unit types, and fight for world domination. Mark Felton Productions viewers are getting a special gift. Click on the link below to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is available for only 30 days, so click the link in the description, choose a country and fight your way to victory in epic real-time battles. We left episode 2 with Martin Bormann and his companion SS Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger lying apparently dead on an overpass bridge connected to the Lehrter railway station in Berlin, as reported by 2 witnesses, Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann and his escaped companion Army Major Gunther Welzin. Only Axmann would ultimately survive to explain to historians the apparent circumstances of Bormann's death. If you recall, Axmann told the Americans in about 1947 that Bormann and Stumpfegger lay dead, their faces clearly identifiable in the moonlight of the early morning hours of the 2nd of May 1945, lying on the bridge over the Invalidenstrasse. Neither man had any obvious wounds, and Axmann asserted that they both must have taken poison. Axmann did not examine the bodies closely, and he crucially did not search Bormann for the original copies of Hitler's last will and testament that the Reichsminister was conveying to Grand Admiral Dönitz in the north of Germany, who was the new Reich president, even though he knew Bormann had these documents and that they were needed urgently in the north. After this touching scene, the Bormann trail goes dead in Berlin. But was Bormann ever seen and identified after the war? This is what we will be examining today. Many of you are undoubtedly aware that in 1972 Bormann's skull was recovered close to where Axmann said he had seen him dead, and that modern DNA tests have proved beyond any reasonable doubt that it is Bormann's. But what I'm going to show you later is many of the glaring inconsistencies that exist in the official West German story of the remains discovery, and how forensic examination of the skull actually showed up several problematic pieces of evidence suggesting that Bormann was alive after 1945, and far from where his skull was conveniently discovered in 1972. Certainly the Western Allies believe that Bormann escaped from Berlin in May 1945. Soviet historians also allege that Bormann had been arranging his future safe passage, and possibly that of his wife Gerda and their 10 children, via his economic advisor, Dr. Helmut von Hummel. Letters from Bormann to his wife, dated the 5th of April 1945, confirm his use of von Hummel, who was head of Group 3B of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. It was von Hummel who was talked into setting up the 2 huts on the east side of the Hohe Gohl mountain near Berchtesgaden that I mentioned in the first episode, the idea being perhaps that they could be used by a single person or a group on the run heading south. This order was made by Bormann on the 24th of April 1945. It is alleged that when Bormann last spoke on the telephone to his wife on the 29th of April, he told her to place herself in von Hummel's care and that he would be in contact as soon as possible. Soviet historian Lev Beziminski, using official Soviet files, alleged that Bormann crossed into Italy on the 16th of August 1947, but no further details were revealed. When Beziminski spoke to von Hummel, the German was evasive and said that Bormann's reference to make a, quote, southward overseas shipment, end quote, in the cable he sent to von Hummel referred simply to moving documents south to safety in Munich and not to moving Bormann. The United States Army's Counterintelligence Corps, the direct ancestor of the CIA, thought that Bormann was alive in 1945, and they posted agents around Frau Bormann, who was dying of cancer in a hospital in Merano in the Italian Alps, hoping Bormann might show up. Gerda Bormann died on the 22nd of March 1946 without further contact with her husband. The Soviets did mention that they had found Bormann's diary in the leather coat of a German corpse in central Berlin, the body laying close to a knocked-out German tank. The Soviets stated that neither the body nor the coat were Bormann's. They surmised that Bormann had stuffed the diary into the coat in order to appear dead to investigators, a sensible move for a man on the run. By the way, one really big thing in Bormann's favor was his anonymity. Hardly anyone outside of Hitler's inner circle knew who he was. He never spoke publicly, and all his appearances were as a background character. This fact would aid his evasion enormously, unlike someone like Heinrich Himmler, who was distinctive and world-famous. Several witnesses placed Bormann in northern Germany or Denmark in June 1945. The author Ladislas Farago found a Danish doctor called Preuss, who claimed to have been approached by a Nazi friend asking for money to get Bormann out of Denmark. Bormann was next sighted in September 1945 in the Via Leonardo da Vinci in Murano, Italy, by someone who knew him extremely well, a Frau Thalheimer, the wife of one of his personal doctors, whom he knew socially. The doctor's wife's story so convinced Hugh Trevor-Roper, the famous British historian and World War II intelligence officer, that Axmann's story of a dead Bormann on the Lehrter Bridge must be unconvincing. So why would Bormann be in northern Italy? Rat lines, secret Nazi escape routes, ran from Germany and Austria into Italy, whence some Vatican officials connived to spirit wanted Nazis out of Europe via the port of Genoa to South America and the Middle East. This was how several high-profile Nazis escaped in the years after World War II, including Adolf Eichmann, the administrative head of the Final Solution, and infamous Auschwitz camp doctor Josef Mengele. They are just two cases of thousands who were helped to flee by sympathizers, by Nazi networks that were put in place before the war ended, and even by United States officials who employed wanted Nazis for intelligence reasons in the years after the war during the early part of the Cold War, and in fact allowed many of them to escape into anonymity in South America and elsewhere, rather than admit they had been using these men who were wanted for heinous crimes committed against the Jews and many other groups. Certainly the Israelis believed that Bormann was alive and well in South America. Interestingly, during the interrogation of Adolf Eichmann following his kidnapping by Mossad agents and removal to Israel to stand trial, Eichmann told German-born Israeli police officer Captain Avner Less, who was one of his interrogators, that Bormann was alive. This was in 1961. This claim was repeated by Eichmann's son Nicholas, who told reporters, quote, "Bormann is not as poor as my father was. Not even the Jews with millions of dollars can get him." End quote. Lots of claims concerning the whereabouts of Bormann and how he escaped Europe were made in the 1960s and 70s, though most were dismissed as fabrications or fantasy. But despite the nonsense that clouded the true story, an Israeli team continued to hunt him, indicating that there must have been real evidence, otherwise why waste the time and resources of a national intelligence agency? The team was led by none other than Dr. Friedman, who had led the operation to kidnap Adolf Eichmann. These were very serious people. It was not only the Israelis that believed Bormann was alive. Following the discovery of Dr. Werner Haider, an SS doctor and wanted war criminal, the Frankfurt state prosecutor in West Germany, Dr. Fritz Bauer, conducted a lengthy interview with him. On the 11th of February 1964, as a result of this interview, a statement was issued which read, quote, "Despite allegations to the contrary, including the testimony of Hans Bauer, Hitler's pilot, the Office of the Attorney General of the State of Hesse continues to pursue its search for Martin Bormann in the factual belief that the head of the NSDAP survived." End quote. It was clear that Dr. Haider had told the West Germans some interesting things that corroborated their own investigation of Bormann. However, 2 days after the statement was issued, Dr. Haider was found hanged in his cell. What Haider had told the West Germans was that in 1945 he had hidden Bormann in the SS hospital at Grasten, near the Danish town of Sonderburg. In July 1964, State Prosecutor Bauer told the press that he had been informed that Bormann was living in Paraguay, and interestingly had been seen in the company of Dr. Josef Mengele on several occasions in the capital city Asunción. By August, more details emerged. Bormann was dead. He had died in 1959 in the house of a Paraguayan German named Bernhard Jung. The body had been buried at the village of Ita, 35 kilometers from Asunción. A West German journalist went to Ita and actually dug up the grave, but the bones appeared to be those of a much older local Indian man. Bernhard Jung was traced to Spain, but he refused all interview requests. Interestingly, when Franz Stangl, the death camp commandant who had been in charge of Treblinka and Sobibor at different times and was responsible for nearly 1 million deaths, was arrested in Brazil, he talked to Tagesspiegel, a German newspaper, and said that Bormann had been, quote, one of us, end quote, that is, a fugitive Nazi in South America. Lots of charlatans tried to get attention or to make money out of the Bormann story. But one of the best pieces of evidence of Bormann's survival came from a former Goebbels propaganda ministry official and honorary SS major named Dr. Johann von Leers. He fled to Argentina in the late 1940s, founding a Nazi journal in Buenos Aires in 1950. Later he moved to Egypt, working as a political advisor for President Nasser's government, converting to Islam and taking the name Omar Amin. He died in Cairo in 1965. Some letters written by von Leers came to light. In one, he wrote to a friend that Bormann was in South America, then living in Brazil. This letter is significant because it was completely private and written years before the press coverage that surrounded the story in the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s. Journalists and historians did find several witnesses in Paraguay who claimed that Bormann had died in the city of Asunción of cancer in 1959, following treatment by Dr. Mengele and other émigré doctors, and was buried secretly at Ita. But all of this is, of course, anecdotal evidence, and not concrete proof of Bormann's survival after the war. The writer Ladislas Farago gathered a lot of evidence concerning Bormann, though some of it was tainted and turned out to have been forged by Paraguayan officials for money. However, among all the dross, there were some good pieces of circumstantial evidence for Bormann being in South America, and this of course is overlooked in the rubbishing of Farago's work. Farago claimed that Bormann crossed the Atlantic from Genoa, Italy, to Argentina aboard an Italian liner, arriving on the 17th of May 1948. Via Vatican Ratline personnel, he had obtained a Red Cross passport for stateless persons. Farago's information was that Bormann travelled under the name Eliezer Goldstein, a Polish Jew born in 1901, occupation geologist. Much of Farago's evidence was later rubbished under investigation, though some of it still stands up to scrutiny. It is interesting to note that Soviet investigators came to the same conclusion as Farago, though independently, that Bormann had indeed escaped to South America via Italy. The Argentine government actually released its files on Martin Bormann on the 1st of February 1992. Their file had been opened on him in 1948, the same year Farago and others alleged that he had entered Argentina by ship. The file contained all the allegations they had ever come across, including correspondence with the United States and West German governments. But they had been remarkably slow and apparently disinterested in following up all leads concerning Bormann. Interestingly, the government office books for the period 1957-60 and 1960-67 were missing, allegedly destroyed by flooding in the archive. Thus, a lot of the information from the real height of the Bormann hunt was missing. Bormann was officially declared dead by the West German government in 1973. From the circumstantial evidence presented, it is certainly possible to reconstruct a possible escape route for Martin Bormann. Beginning at the moment when he and Dr. Stumpfegger ran off from the Soviet troops who surrounded them in the early hours of the 2nd of May 1945 near the Lehrte station, after his escape group had jumped down from a bridge and landed amongst a camped Soviet infantry platoon. Bormann next popped up in Schleswig-Holstein before being placed in June 1945 in the SS hospital at Sonderburg, Denmark. We know that Bormann had ordered huts to be prepared on the Hohe Göll near Berchtesgaden, so there was a possible staging area if he had chosen to go south, and he could have posed as just another middle-aged, bombed-out refugee moving around shattered Germany. He was identified in Merano, Italy in September 1945 by the wife of one of his doctors. At some point, he must have been in Rome, obtaining the necessary passport and Argentine entry visa. Next, Farago placed Bormann, now calling himself Elysia Goldstein, disembarking from a ship in Argentina on the 16th of February 1948. And finally, we have some interesting anecdotal evidence from relatively good sources of Bormann being in Asunción, Paraguay in at least 1959, and dying in that year from cancer, aged 58 or 59. He was then buried in secret near the capital. In the next episode, we will deal with the elephant in the room, the discovery of Martin Bormann's skull in 1972 in Berlin, close to where he was said to have died in 1945. We will examine what evidence there is for Bormann and Stumpfegger's corpses having been buried in 1945. Later, we will look at the possibility of forensic fraud and whether, in fact, Bormann's skull had been placed there and Bormann had indeed died somewhere else. Don't forget that Mark Felton production viewers are getting a special gift from Call of War World War II. Click on the link below to receive 13,000 gold and 1 month premium subscription for free. Choose a country and fight your way to victory. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.